I think what happens with the religion is we become very dogmatic. We don't think, we don't ponder. And I guess people of faith stop looking for the truth. If you look at Islamic art, culture, much of that was based on sacred geometry. Buildings were based upon that. So I'll give you an example. We think that earthquake-proof buildings have come recently, or in Japan. It's not the case. 500 years ago, Sheikh Baha'i had produced bomb-proof buildings based upon the sacred geometry, and today they stand. And remember, Allah is an Arabic term, but it's the Christians of Arabia also use the term Allah. In fact, they used it pre-Islam, what many people don't know. The Assyriac church used the term Allah even before Islam came along. Today, we look at things exclusively through one lens. In the olden days, there was nothing wrong in discussing and looking at each other's traditions and learning, because ultimately nobody has full ownership of the truth, as we say. He's appreciative of the mystical side, the Kabirs, for example, or in fact Guru Nanak's very close friend, Mardana, was a Muslim, if I'm not mistaken. So when you're at that level, you don't see these things.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Illuminating Dialogues number 40, where I really have the pleasure to sit down and dialogue with Imam Razawi today. How are you? And Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing good, and it's just really good to sit down with you. The first time we met each other was, like we were just saying before this conversation, COP26. And I really enjoyed that process of COP26 where everybody got together, and I think we had a brief conversation and something sparked within me. I think you said a few words, a few mystical, philosophical words that really rung a bell, and that's been in my mind ever since. So yeah, I felt intuitively to invite you, as I said, to this dialogue. So it's a pleasure to sit down. And for viewers who are not familiar with yourself, I'd like to give a short introduction. So Sayyid Ali Abbas Razawi is a Director General and Chief Imam of the Scottish Ahlul Bayt Society, SABS, British scholar and religious leader with a research interest in Islamic philosophy, mysticism and comparative religion. And of course, much, much more. And today, I'm hoping to dialogue and delve into Islamic philosophy, some of the saints, perhaps some of the metaphysics, and bridging community through understanding how history deeper can help us understand ourselves and the worlds as well. So this podcast series is called Illuminating Dialogues. It's really a space for us to come together in a dialogue, a flow of meaning, to maybe journey to a place we haven't gone before, and as you said, create some art, and share that light, hopefully with us, the speakers, and also the listeners as well. So with that being said, my first question to you is, what lights you up?
What an interesting question, actually. A number of things light me up. The first thing really is the journey towards truth. I think every human being is looking for happiness. And we do multiple things in life for the sake of happiness. Even a bank robber, when he or she goes to rob a bank, the premise is that that money will give them happiness. Whether you commit a crime or you do something legal, there's always a motivation to find happiness. And so therefore, human beings tend to move towards happiness, generally on the material plane. But I find that in the pursuit of truth, what one tends to move towards is light. Because everything around you that you see is light, and light illuminates from the divine. Darkness is non-existence, light is existence. So for anything to exist requires a metaphysical light. And that metaphysical light, when it illuminates from the heart, gives the person peace. So in essence, we're looking for happiness, but at the same time, we're also looking for peace. Happiness is short-lived. For whatever material pleasure you have, once you buy that Rolex, after a week's time, the novelty wears off. Once you bought that Lamborghini, the same thing. Whatever it may be on the material plane, because your soul is created for infinity, it reflects the image of God. Therefore, something more whole is required. And I see that as a journey towards truth. So where I'm at the stage of my life, probably having completed half of my life, is the necessity to go towards truth, to understand reality. Many of us fall into dogma. I think what happens with the religion is we become very dogmatic. We don't think, we don't ponder. And I guess people of faith stop looking for the truth. And when a person does look for the truth, from my personal experience, what you find is that nobody has, you could say, complete control of the truth. But the truth manifests itself in different ways onto different people. And so this is why we see, and in particular within mysticism and religions do talk about, that human beings are a reflection of God, or the reflection of the divine. But you could have 7 billion reflections, as you do. Each one of them holds their own reality. We'd say in Arabic, haqiqa. Each one of them has their own truth. And the reason why we've been created different is because we can come to understand the voluminous nature of God by looking firstly within our own selves, and secondly by looking at others. So I guess what motivates me towards a light, or light in my life actually, is a movement towards truth. And one has to be honest with themselves. Sometimes that truth may not be compatible with the dogma or the theology of their faith. And it's okay. Because I believe that much of what we have are interpretations. Much of what we have, and I can come from the faith, the Islamic faith, 1400 years have gone by. Sometimes things evolve. If I were to say, and I have tried this by the way, say something to somebody, and I've asked him 6 hours later what I've said, it moves from what I actually said. And the same way for Muslims, other than the Quran, which is the word of God, human speech or ideas can evolve during time. And this is why both, I guess, Jews and Muslims were very close in terms of the legal side of their faith. They have a very pragmatic system. Given the time, given the period where we're in, certain laws can evolve. Or from, you could say, universal, certain specifics can be extracted. But anyhow, to come back. So I think in answer to your question, what drives me today, or what lights up my life, is journeying towards truth. And within Islam, one of the names of God is truth itself.
Amazing. That's so beautiful. I resonate, and I'm sure the viewers would as well, about what you said. And that's something I try to navigate as well. And it's not something you can see. It's like a deeper feeling, I feel, that it's very hard to, it's weird because we live in a physical world, and like everyone's truth, like to actually go deeply, it's such a personal journey, but also such a challenging journey at times, I guess, as well. And I was just wondering if you could let the viewers know a bit about your journey. How did you start to be drawn deeper into the mysticism and philosophical sides? Maybe how did you start on that, and then where did that flow lead you into researching or discovering more?
It's interesting you asked that question. I was about 10 years old, and I remember having a moment of crisis in my life, whereby two things immediately came to me. Firstly, that we're all going to die. So that was quite a panic to know the time you could drop dead. And what's after that? But I guess the second thing is that I could prove God, but I couldn't feel God. So all the arguments of God existing and causality and all sorts of other things, I looked at, studied, could argue it, but I couldn't feel it. At the age of 16, I went on pilgrimage. And as I went on pilgrimage, I came, you could say, to a tomb or a grave or a shrine of a saint. And that's the best translation I can give currently. And this friend of God, this saint, the overflow from the grave of that particular person was so powerful that in my heart, it filled up the reality of God.
Mm.
What I could rationalize, which I wasn't feeling, because ultimately it comes to feeling, was complete when I went there. And so I realized there's something about these saints, people who may have passed on in the physical sense, but there is a tremendous overflow. And at the age of 16, what does one do? Well, you come back to your parents and say, right, I want to go to the journey. Says, no, mate, you've got to sit down, finish your studies first. And then after that, then I went to university, and again, the same stipulation was there. But the minute that I finished, I remember wanting to go on this journey, wanting to go and find mystics, holy men, people who could take you on this pathway. Now, mysticism and philosophy are two different things in many ways.
Oh.
Yes, they're interlinked, but philosophy can be rational. So, at least within the Islamic frame, you have 3 or 4 different schools. You've got the peripatetic school, the Mashaite school, which is really a continuation of Plotinus. It's a new Platonic school. You've got the Aristotelian school of Ibn Rushd, for example. And all of this kind of ends in the time of Ghazali. But philosophy continues and it develops. So you've got one school, which is the Illuminationist school, which was actually around just before Ghazali, which was by Sohrawardi, Shahabuddin Sohrawardi. Very similar to the Kabbalah, by the way.
Mm.
After that, then you've got the Theosophical school of Mullah Sadra, the existential school. And the Persians were very strong at advancing philosophy. But there was a goal as well. So if you look at Ibn Sina, as though Ibn Sina is a philosopher and uses rational knowledge, but the end goal for Ibn Sina, if you look at right towards the end, is actually to find that divine spark. His philosophy leads on to his mysticism.
Mm.
And that's not always the case with modern philosophers. If you look at the 20th century, from Karl Popper onwards, their journey is not to find God, or at least not to find existence. Whereas within the Islamic philosophies, what you found is that the discussion was on existence itself, being. And that being ultimately led to something far more divine, even though they didn't call it God. Philosophers, again, don't look at the term God. But what at least the Islamic philosophers were looking at was they were looking at reality and truth. And they were in the pursuit of this reality and truth. The Islamic mystics, nevertheless, are a different breed altogether. There's a conversation that takes place between Ibn Sina and a very famous Sufi saint. And he looks up and he says, what you can rationalize, I can taste.
Wow.
So the idea really is that to take that step towards tasting the truth is what we call in Arabic ilm huduri. There's 2 types of ilm knowledge. Ilm, one is known as ilm which you gather via a medium. It's called husul, to gain, hasil, right? If I can bring it to a more subcontinental term, hasil, right? So from husuli. So here basically is to gain something via a medium. So for example, we're having a conversation.
Yes.
The knowledge that I get from you, or which I can transfer to you, is via a medium.
Yes.
I have a phone, you have your laptop. I have speech, you have speech. I have ears, you have ears. I have eyes, you have eyes, right? But the knowledge that the mystics are looking for is unmediated knowledge. Is manifest in the soul, which cannot be described, because the minute it becomes words, it becomes husuli again. That unmediated knowledge, if I put it in a way, there was a diagram or there was an example that Ibn Sina gave Avicenna. He says the hanging man. He says, for example, the man, if a child is born in a vortex, can't touch, can't see, can't taste, can't do anything, and has no knowledge of the external world, I is still dead. And this is where I think Descartes got it wrong. He says, I think, therefore I am. No, it's actually I tells you that you are. The I-ness inside of you tells you. So he's debating, well, is this a dream? Is it not a dream? Am I really alive? Am I not alive? Actually, no, whether it's a dream, you're alive or not, the fact that you are saying it, I think, therefore, he looked at the effect, the think. The cause is actually the I-ness of the human being.
Mm.
So deep inside of you, you have an understanding of who you are. And the mystics want to understand God like that. So it's a manifestation to the soul of a human being. I don't need to then rationalize. I don't need to look at proof. I know God because I feel God. So I guess that's what I wanted to feel. That's the journey that I wanted. And by no means, am I even close to what I wanted. But the fact of the matter is that that's really when I was when I came to know a bit more, I was probably about 22, 23. And that's my whole life after that then. In the pursuit of that. And again, you do get derailed because of the world now and again. Sometimes a bit of politics comes into play, sometimes a bit of family comes into play, sometimes fame comes into play, sometimes fortune comes into play. But the most important thing is this: realign yourself.
Mm.
In particular, in a time, and just before we got on the call, I was speaking to a friend of mine from Houston, and he's an occultist. So we were having a discussion, and he said, "Look, there are so many," and in his words, he was saying, "There are so many peers who are fake.
Mm.
They're only out to make money. People are only doing these things because of money." Where actually the truth is far beyond that. The purpose of the occult was to help people,
Mm.
and you're accountable to God because of that. But today, it's really about making money, or if somebody has an ability, it's not always used in the correct way. And again, I'm generalizing. I'm sure that there are many people in the world who do use things in a good way.
Mm.
But if you look at some of the great books which are still there, I'm going off a bit on a tangent, but
That's okay.
so for example, if you look at the astrological book Lal Kitab, which
Mm.
was actually written by a Sikh in Urdu, which is an authoritative book on astrology, Lal Kitab.
Oh, when was that written?
This has been over 100 years ago, so it's about 700 pages. It's a very thick book. Um,
Mm.
Lal Kitab through an astrologer who had studied literally the line by line. And if you look at the timing as well, so sometimes when we go into the occult, you'll see that when Mars and Saturn come together, there's certain incidences that happen, one of them being those kind of things. So so that also caught my attention. And I remember speaking to him, and though the occult really is, okay, there's a God element in that, but true finding God has got nothing to do with these things. These are all side dishes, so to speak.
Mm.
These are all impressive knowledge that a person may have, but in essence, it's really got nothing to do with God. If you go deep down, you don't need to be a religious person, or you don't have to be a spiritual or a pious person to have that knowledge. But it's there to help people. So as my friend was saying before we had a conversation, he was saying that there are many false individuals out there who are just there to make money. But whatever you do, the key is do it for God.
Mm.
Be selfless in what you do. And I guess those people who are atheists may say, well, we don't believe in God. Why God? Because for a religious person, it gives them accountability. It aligns their selflessness. It allows for people to empathize if you're truly, and I'm not saying that, all religious people are like that. In fact, no, the vast majority of religious people I've come to know are very arrogant and very judgmental.
Mm.
However, if a person is truly following the spirit of their faith, regardless of what faith it is, what I do find is that they will gain that accountability in life because you're accountable to God, you're accountable to yourself.
Mm.
Also, at the same time, what you find is that there's an empathy there. And I think true morality comes when you empathize with other people. There's a pain there. I could say that if you look at some of the more mystical spiritual orders as well, the one thing they emphasized was human beings' poverty. The human being, and it could be symbolic as well, but your own spiritual poverty and your own physical poverty, both of which are important. Your spiritual poverty, meaning that you're always poor in front of God who's rich. And if it wasn't for God, you wouldn't have what you have. And in terms of your physical poverty, allows you to empathize with other people. That one day I was there, today I may not be, but it's important for me to help my brothers and sisters.
Mm.
State. But anyhow, I tangent off on very many different topics, so I'll hone it back.
Yeah, it was so beautiful. Like so many things came up for me. What you said, I think just straight off the bat, it's just like the authenticity piece. Like, can I be authentic to my heart? Because even though I'm young, on this journey I'm on, coaching people, and of course, with many talking to many other people, it's like, how can I actually be serving from a place that is aligned with my heart? And what you mentioned about the um, I don't know what you called it. It was like, as soon as you say it, it becomes um, it becomes known. So I think in the language in Gurmukhi or Punjabi, we call it like anhad or unstruck melody,
Hmm.
and that really resonates. So it's like all of these languages, it's like trying to describe very similar concepts. And I was really interested about, so you mentioned like philosophy and mysticism, and there was like a Platonic school, and we had a guest on recently who talked about how the geometry of the universe is very divine and sacred. And I know that there was Islamic Golden Age, and I'm wondering, how did the mysticism and philosophy play into the Islamic Golden Age, were people more inclined? Were people perhaps more inclined to pursue philosophy, and that resulted in these novel concepts being made? Was it because of certain practices that were happening at that time that allowed that civilization to flourish? So, how did that kind of come about in terms of your understanding?
Yeah. I think with Islamic Golden Age, the purpose of knowledge really was to come to know the divine.
Mm,
And though today we may have advanced in certain aspects of knowledge, I still don't think that we're complete in our pursuit of knowledge today. We have this specialization that takes place at university, but I still don't feel that at university you are given the ability to think for yourself anymore.
mm,
And I guess this is why you don't, or we haven't developed the greats. So we may be advanced in certain elements, for example, technology, AI,
mm,
and so forth. But the question is always there. For every time we advance, it gives us more suffering. We as a community today are more depressed than at any other time. We have more mental illnesses. We are more troubled. We are more in pain, though technologically we've advanced. When knowledge comes from human beings and there's a disbalance, this is what it reaches. When the knowledge is divine, it reaches a balance. So if I look at what you're talking about, geometry, sacred geometry, basically. If you look at Islamic art, culture, much of that was based on sacred geometry. Buildings were based upon that. So I'll give you an example. We think that earthquake-proof buildings have come recently or in Japan. It's not the case. 500 years ago, Sheikh Bahai had produced bomb-proof buildings based upon the sacred geometry, and today they stand.
mm,
You look at the first metropolitan city in the world, it was Isfahan in Iran.
mm,
Each one of those buildings, the trees that were planted, or for example, the water which was allowed to come through, was both ecologically sound, so there wasn't any kind of polluting of the environment, but at the same time, it was in balance. And you'll see this as well. Islamic art contributed today to, for example, St. Paul's Cathedral
mm,
or any Gothic cathedral in Europe. Notre Dame, for example. Every Gothic style cathedral that you have in Europe goes back to a particular building found close to the dead cities in Syria. And that was the prototype for all of this. So when Sir Christopher Wren was building St. Paul's Cathedral, the letters are there. He wrote to the church to say, but this is Saracen art. Now, Saracen was derogatory, basically, these barbarians.
mm,
The church said, no, you run with it, you go with it. So if you go and look at the vault system, or if you look at the arches, Islamic arches and vaults were created for one thing, unity. Within their outer manifestation, they were meant to see God. So in the same way, for example, that you as a Sikh believe in the one supreme being.
mm,
And in fact, if you look at the Adi Shankaracharya, when he writes, for example, the Advaita Vedanta,
mm,
that you look at one supreme being, right? Now, that supreme being, you're meant to be in unity with that supreme being. But there shouldn't be a contradiction in your life. So and we call it in Islam monotheism or tawheed. If I'm a believer in monotheism, it's not just a concept, it's a reality. There shouldn't be a contradiction in my life. Islamic philosophers therefore went and they built things and they did things which were helpful for them to get to unity. And you had the waterfalls and the trees and everything else, which were all meant to be signs that pertain back to God. So it's quite interesting in that. So the Islamic Golden Era, which was they were teaching over 100 sciences, subjects, I should say, not literal sciences, but subjects, from algebra to geometry and everything else. To even if you look at the foundations of algorithms, Arabi Rumi came along. But the name itself was. So Islamic scientists, philosophers, in terms of medicine, Ibn Sina was studied in Bombay all the way up to the Second World War, even up to very recently. So if you look at much of Islamic teachings, they were based towards one thing, and that was unity. So though there were specializations that were taking place, there wasn't a removal of the divine. Unfortunately, what happens today in the Islamic world is there's been that removal of the divine, politics has come into play and so forth. But we are very far behind in the Islamic world to what we were once upon a time. And I don't think, I think today even the Western world is devoid of sages. If you go to India, for example, 2,000 years ago, you look at the sages there, you look at the balance which was there. They were happier, there was a balance there. And I think every civilization has gone for it, from the Aryan civilization. If you look at the Sassanians and the Persians, in fact, the last rise of the Persians were in the time of the Safavids. And the Safavid dynasty really started off as mystics. Their ancestor, who was Sheikh Safiuddin Ardebili, was a Sufi master. He had his own order. So, again, even the Ottomans, if you look at them and see, Ottomans, okay, we had the Ottoman dynasty that lasted for as many years as it did, but they were patrons of the arts and culture and music and so forth. And they also have this Sufi connection to the Naqshbandiya, which is a Sufi order. So I think Islam and its golden age happened because of its kind of openness, firstly, but at the same time, it's focused towards the divine. And you must remember that during this period, there was an exchange of knowledge which was taking place. So you had, for example, the likes of Maimonides living in Fatimi, Egypt at the time. So there was an exchange of, for example, Jewish, Muslim, Christian. But at the same time, also, and this is going before Sikhism. So if I could use the term Hindu, obviously Hindu is a concept that came later, but from the Indus Valley, those traditions which were there, or if you look at, for example, the two, where India is, you've got the North and the South traditions. They were being converted in the sense that they were being translated and becoming. And so Mir Frindisky, for example, translated much of those Vedic texts into Persian and into Arabic. And there was nothing wrong in that. And this is the beauty. Today, we look at things exclusively through one lens. In the olden days, there was nothing wrong in discussing and looking at each other's traditions and learning, because ultimately nobody has full ownership of the truth, as we say. And especially when it comes to spirituality, where we come to unity, all of our faiths is on the spiritual pathway. And this is why I look at Guru Nanak. And when he speaks about Hinduism and Islam both, you can see that he's appreciative of the mystical side, the Kabirs, for example, or in fact Guru Nanak's very close friend Mardana was a Muslim, if I'm not mistaken. So when you're at that level, you don't see these things. These are all labels. What you then see is you see a person journeying to the light, and that's what's the most important. I don't see Muslim, and I don't see Hindu, and I don't see Christian, and I don't see Sikh anymore. I see a person, male or female, journeying towards the light, journeying towards God. And I want to be there because I know that when they journey, their overflow of light is enough to influence my life in a positive way. So I think that's in a nutshell.
Hey everybody, sorry to interrupt your podcast, but if I could please ask you to take the time to like and subscribe to this channel. It would help us as we try to grow this channel and share our guests' deep wisdom with you and the rest of the world. What lights you up? Why do I ask this? Because I want to create a space for you to go slow to go far and offer a space of one-to-one coaching, and I'll put some testimonials up here. This will allow you to access all of the wisdom for our illuminating dialogues, actually integrate and implement this wisdom in your daily life for whatever means you'd like to transform, live in alignment, live in purpose, and of course live in your dharma. If that resonates with you, you can book a session directly with me on Jhoty.com. If you would like to join the free community, you can also go to Jhoty.com. All the links are in the description, and connect with like-minded people, where we also have a chat about the next Illuminating Dialogue podcast episodes. So thank you again, everybody, for supporting this podcast. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this podcast. Yeah, that was so powerful. Thank you for sharing all of that. And yeah, I really resonated. What came up for my mind was also like, so Guru Nanak was the first Guru, 10th Guru, Guru Gobind Singh. And then Anandpur Sahib at that time, he was inviting different people to translate the ancient Vedic texts, and also the language was Farsi or Persian, people were writing in. And of course, many Islamic scholars as well. And we have in the Guru Granth Sahib Sheyk Farid, and I find the way he writes is very, I think he was actually born before Guru Nanak. And I'm just wondering if you could also shed some light or connect us to Sheyk Farid and also bin Arabi, and maybe how they seen the divine, how they express themselves in I don't know if you have a relationship with them or you cultivated a connection through understanding them. That would also be quite interesting for any Sikh viewers as well, to connect to their certain understandings.
It's interesting you say that. My PhD was on Ibn Arabi, so
Nice.
I think with Ibn Arabi, he was a prodigy in and of itself. Ibn Rushd, the rationalist philosopher, the Aristotelian philosopher, he was old age, and this 13-year-old boy comes, and he's basically reading the man's mind, and he's basically describing for him his inner thoughts in terms of the formulas or whatever he had in his mind. I think with Ibn Arabi, Ibn Arabi's journey is the journey of the heart. And for Ibn Arabi, the journey is 4 stages almost. The 4 stages begins on the world of the material realm, where you see multiplicity. But that multiplicity slowly sheds and you see the unity in the multiplicity. So for Ibn Arabi, it's a movement from the physical world towards the realm of unity. From seeing things differently. For example, I see a banana, I see a pear, I see sweet potato. I'm just telling you what's in front of me. And then all of a sudden, that becomes wujud, existence. So all I see now is one existence. They may have an outer form, but it's all molded so that he said that God is pure existence. And that existence is molded into different things. So for example, when that existence comes down a couple of notches, it produces a tree. Creation. So for him, it was really about moving from the multiplicity and seeing the unity in everything. And then from the unity, the second journey for him was that going through the names of God. So there's a huge emphasis on the names of God, that each name of God creates something. So I'll give you an example. There's a name of God called Mercy, Ar-Rahman. There's a name of God called the Subtle. And there's a name of God, the Life Giver. When these 3 names come together, it produces water, for example. So every human being is a combination of names, which goes back to the archetypal realm. So for Ibn Arabi, everything he saw was a combination of names of God. So obviously he got closer to God like that. And there's a story whereby his family say for 3 days he was in the room just meditating. And we could see his stomach expand as if he had eaten something, but he hadn't done it. And it was because he was gaining that nourishment from the divine. Maybe they could go for 7 days without eating or drinking because there was a connection, a deeper soul connection to the divine. So I guess it's difficult to start. Where do we start with Ibn Arabi? But the fact of the matter is that Ibn Arabi himself, it seems like that he was almost as if he was gaining divine revelation. He was a person who was in direct contact, if I could use that term, with the higher realms. And I think for most of his students, he pushed them to immediately strip themselves of the physical world and connect themselves to the divine. I guess one of the ways of doing that is meditation. If a person meditates and they can break consciousness, immediately you have an access. You can gain those messages. And again, I'm not talking about messages in a schizophrenic where they hear voices, but the idea is that there's a manifestation of the soul, and there's almost as if something is revealed on the soul. Or even with Farid, if you look at these were people who meditated. These were people who did seva, which again is important because it's important to remove the selfish ego of a person. I think seva is very good at that. And then at the same time, I guess with seva and meditation, you also have to remember prayer because it grounds you and connects you. But there's something which you find within Shi'i tradition. You find it in the readings of Ibn Arabi. There's a concept known as fatuwa. In Farsi, they call it javan mardi, basically chivalry. And this is something that you find amongst the gurus, that they have chivalry. And you find that within Shi'i Islam, the branch of Islam that I belong to. The idea of chivalry, Imam Ali, famous with his two-pointed sword. And though he was a mystic in every sense of the word, every single Sufi order goes back to Imam Ali, but he was a chivalrous man. Chivalry is important. And remember, the same Aurangzeb who put to death Guru Gobind Singh was the same Aurangzeb who put our leaders, for example, to death as well. So, for example, Father Nurullah Shushtari. So some of the great saints, you go to Agra or Delhi or wherever it is, you can see some of our saints were there. So, in a sense, the Sikh pathway and the Shi'i pathway are quite similar, that there's a belief in this chivalry, Javan Mardi, which you also find across not just religions, I guess, across traditions and faiths. And Ibn Arabi was a believer in that as well. So what is a brave person? There's a particular story whereby the Battle of Badr takes place. The Battle of Badr was the first battle of Islam. And the Muslims were outnumbered completely. There was about 313 to 900. And they won. And so after they're coming back all tired, having fasted, because the Prophet indicated you must fast when you fight. And people think, oh my God, if there's no food and water, what happens? And he indicated, no, there's a divine strength that will come. Came and they won. And he said, congratulations. That was the minor battle.
Wow.
So jihad, so he called it jihad. Jihad today is seen as a negative concept. Jihad is not a negative concept. Jihad comes from juhad. Juhad means a struggle against your soul. He said this physical battle was only a minor battle. The greater battle, the great jihad, is the struggle of the soul. He says, now that you've come to understand how to defend yourself and to be chivalrous, and he said, don't cut any trees down and don't block water getting to people. And, it's very important for you to take care of women and children. And if a person turns their back to you, don't kill them in the battlefield and only defend yourself and so forth and so on. All the ethics were there. And after all of that, and the Muslims are absolutely knackered and tired and everything else, and he says, congratulations, but that's not the major jihad. So what is the major jihad? Well, the major jihad is when you fight against your ego.
Wow.
And I think that's what defines a mystic. Farid is different in many ways. The poetry of Farid is beautiful because he's able to encapsulate the divine into that. But for poetry, ishq is required, love is required, muhabba is required. And that's what it is. This is why, if you notice, the mystics always talk about two things in their poetry. love for a woman, but that's a metaphor for the beauty of God. At the same time, drinking the jam of, intoxication, and that intoxication, not a physical wine. This wine of intoxication that the mystics talk about is the intoxication when you have union with God, when your mind becomes redundant, because your mind describes, but your mind cannot taste. I can describe to you honey, my mind can, but my mind doesn't understand honey. But when you taste it, it is completely different from all description. So when the intellect stops, you are intoxicated in that, what could I say? In the ishq of God, in the love of God, is when then that poetry begins. And as the poetry begins, the only metaphor you can use is love for a person or a woman in this case, or the wine of intoxication, or the wine of love, that you are then willing to sacrifice yourself for your beloved.
Wow, amazing. It's like that love takes over and causes that writing to happen. And you mentioned chivalry as well, and actually that I think we had this in a previous podcast with Dr. Luis, and it's quite interesting that we're connecting. Like you said, we connect, but at the same time we ground as well. And having that chivalrous is almost like a tradition aspect as well. So there's like the spiritual, I think we call it midi pidi. So
Yeah.
it's like pidi is like the beer, like we mentioned at the start, and then midi is like, it comes from amir. Amir is like king or royal.
Yeah.
Beer. So it's that balance. And does in the scriptures or in the prayers that you say, is there also different metaphysical flavors of these prayers? Like some are more embody this more feminine quality of beer, and then another prayers embody a more masculine quality. I'm curious how you connect with the prayers or the certain aspects.
So I think there's two sides to this. One, in terms of the masculine and the feminine, we look at it as the Jalal and Jamal of God, the beauty and the majesty of God.
Oh.
So the names of God are divided within the majesty and the beauty of God. In the same way, Islam tends to have a number of prayers. You have what the Christians would call the canonical prayers, which in our case would be the 5 prayers of the day that you recite. Those are the canonical prayers, and those are very monotheistic. It has a very kind of monotheistic color to it. But then you have private prayer, or what you call japa yoga, the idea of the prayer of the heart, in fact, what the Eastern churches call the Jesus prayer. So you've got the canonical prayers, the 5 daily prayers. Then you've got the supplications of the heart. And then at the same time, then you've got the dhikr, the remembrance, the awrad, the dua. So there's certain dua books. Some of them, as you say, have a more beauty element, a feminine element to it. Some of them have a more jalali element to it, more majestic element to it. So they are intertwined, and depending on where the mystic is, certain names are names of beauty, certain names are names of majesty of God. But generally within a mystical journey, you have to go for the beautiful names, the beauty of God. If I could use the term femininity to get to the masculinity, body oneself, because the outer curtain, or you could say they call it the hijab, the outer kind of barrier, which separates the essence of God, are those names of Jalal. And they're the protectors of the names. They're the protectors of the essence of God, the Dhat of God. So that has to be broken through. And this is why you'll notice that sometimes even the names of God become a kind of a barrier. And this is why the tradition talks about the hijab meaning barrier of light and dark. So you can even have light as a barrier, and that needs to be broken so that you have that union with God or the essence of God.
Amazing. I think the way you explain that, like, you have to go through the feminine to reach the masculine, because, yeah, sometimes, like, we started off with light, like, going towards that light, but then also breaking through that light. I just resonate with that concept a lot as well. And it's a very grounding concept as well. And I was also come across terms such as wada and tahwid. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but does that also embody that oneness or love that we were talking about? Could you maybe describe these also terms?
Would you repeat the terms again, please?
Yeah, wada. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it. WAHDAH and TAWHID.
Okay, Tawheed and Wahdat.
Yeah, sorry, my pronunciation's off.
No, it's okay. So Tawheed basically is monotheism.
Okay.
Wahada yuwahadu Tawheed, it's the Arabic, which basically means for multiplicity going into the state of unity, gathering together. So Tawheed is monotheism. Wahdat again is to bring to one. But in the spiritual realm, it's actually a bit different. So there are two names of God in Arabic, Wahid and Ahad. Wahid is Ahad, and Wahid could also be translated as one. But actually within the mystical realm, what you find is that this maqam, the station of Wahidiyat, is the highest level in creation. But maqam wahdat is a level which is above creation itself. So the highest level of manifestation of God is the name Allah. The name Allah encapsulates all of the names of God. It is what they call the ism jam. Ism means name, jam means to gather. When all of the names of God gather together, it is the name Allah. But there is something above the name of Allah itself, which is the station of unity. And that is nameless then, because by putting a name to it, you delimit it immediately. So I'll give you a verse of the Quran which may explain it a bit better. In the Quran, Allah says, Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth, meaning everything in the heavens and the earth from your cells has the light of God in it. Everything's God around you, everything that you see, from every single aspect of creation, because God is the light of the heavens and the earth. But Allah had to become light to become then the light of the heavens and the earth. These are manifestations. But that creation goes back to light, light goes back to Allah. Allah is the gathering of everything. But that's the name. Go above the name, what do you find? Something which is nameless. Why is it nameless? Because of the fact that by giving something a name, you delimit it automatically. So that is you could say that unknown, they call it ghaibul ghaib. There's nothing there in the sense, but there's everything there. And this is that stage where Allah or God or the divine have to reveal itself. Without revealing, you'll never understand it. So when the revelation takes place, the first stage, which they call Ibn Arabi calls ta'ayun, basically delimitation takes place, is when God becomes God. Because God has to become God for you to comprehend, otherwise you wouldn't be able to. For as long as God is hidden behind those veils of light and darkness, there's nothing there then. But what has to come is that the absolute has to delimit some level of itself for there to be creation to come into play. So these two terms, Wahid and Ahad, symbolize that. One symbolizes that point of unity that all of creation aligns to, and one symbolizes the essence which is hidden, and there is nothing unnamed. It is darkness, or it could be light. A human being first understands their poverty. So at the level of Tawheed, as you mentioned, Tawheed is when you come to know your poverty. So you could say your vision will be of darkness. You will see the black light. When your manifestation comes along, when you see those visions, spiritual visions, you'll see that it's darkness, black light. The reason being is that denotes your spiritual poverty. You come to know, I am completely reliant on the absolute. But when that annihilation into the essence of God takes place, then you get to the stage of wahdat. And that wahda is quite an interesting stage, because then all you see is light. Now you're one with the light. So it's not the dark light anymore, but it's the bright light that encapsulates everything, because you become one with that light. Don't know if that makes sense.
I think it's maybe it's not something that can be understood by the mind, but it's probably an experience. So, and it very mirrors that dark light as, or that breaking through the light you were talking about previously. And also like the names itself, like Allah or the other 99 names, do they also have, like when they are being pronounced, do they have certain metaphysical consequences like in the body that
Yes.
reflects that?
Yes. So the names manifest from the tongue. So you recite it on the tongue and it goes to the heart.
Mm.
So you find that if you want to embody a particular name, you recite it. And it becomes a word, meaning you're sitting, you're walking, you're every aspect of your life, then you're reciting it, you're reciting it. There's a difference between dhikr and wird, I guess. One has a special time and location to it. It could have a particular number to it. You recite this 100 times or 1,000 times, and one is that you continuously recite it. So one has a number to it, and one is without number, and that's quite interesting to bear in mind as well.
Mm.
So each one of the 99 names. So, for example, what you call the Shahada, right? You've heard this concept, Shahada,
Mm.
proclamation of faith. Muslims say, La ilaha illallah, for
Mm.
example. What does that mean? La ilaha is negation of everything other than God. Negation of what? Negation of my car, negation of my attachments, negation of my material love, negation of everything that attaches me to other than God. So this negation is important, and then affirmation that there is no God, meaning that I don't worship anything material. I don't worship anything but you. I negated first all the other ilahs, illallah,
Mm.
other than Allah. Allah here meaning what? The absolute supreme being. And remember, Allah is an Arabic term, but it's the Christians of Arabia also use the term Allah.
Oh.
And in fact, they used it pre-Islam. What many people don't know. The Assyriac church used the term Allah even before Islam came along. So
Wow.
it's very interesting actually, because this term Allah is genderless, and it's also a name that gathers together all the other names. So it doesn't have an immediate, its qualities are everything basically. So this is why some Sufis only recite the name Allah. They say Allah, 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 because
Mm.
in that is housed all the other 99 names.
Mm.
So you're embodying everything. But no, if you specifically want something, people, if you want to be loved, people may recite Wadud, and so forth. Or if you want money, or there's certain names of God. So you will find that mystics, or at least peers, give out certain formulae or formulas to the disciples to allow the disciples to achieve what they require to achieve.
Mm. Yeah, it's very similar to the mantras or japas being given out for certain people. And yeah, it's very interesting how that proclamation. It's like I leave all attachments and only to Allah, but then at the same time, you're still recognizing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're still recognizing that force within the material world still. So it's like you're still honoring that, but you're not attached to it. Is that right?
Exactly. By you saying La ilaha, it tells you that there is
Yeah.
there is these attachments. There is something there, in a sense. But above and beyond that is the divine presence.
Yeah.
So as you say, by even though you're negating it, but you're affirming the fact that it exists.
Yeah. Yeah.
You say, if you could use that term, you're respecting creation around you, but what you're saying is that my ultimate attachment is not to this.
Mm-hmm.
If I want to gain moksha or nirvana or whatever it may be, it will require for me to let go of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why that la ilaha illallah is. It's interesting. I'll tell you something. I used to have a very good friend, um, Mahesh, who passed away during COVID. And he was in herbal medicine, but he was also quite a deep disciple of the Hare Krishna movement. And I remember once we sat down and we recited La ilaha illallah together. And he went into ecstasy and he says, what is it? And when I explained to him that it's a negation of everything, for him, this was quite similar to the Krishna consciousness that he was used to and was preached. And he said, look, he said, we need to do something whereby we can have both recitals. So he said, from his perspective, and he said, from your perspective, one day we should get together and you should come and you should bring this La ilaha illallah. But again, he passed away. We never got the opportunity. But you do find people who see beyond, just a tradition, and they see the value in other traditions as well.
Amazing. And that just speaks to the specialness of, this chap. I'm sorry to hear of his passing. I'm just wondering now, as we slowly also begin to wrap up, how does researching history, of course, there's many tensions going on worldwide, and this conversation in and of itself just shows how deeply everything, of course, is part and interwoven. But how does researching history specifically help de-escalate tensions in the work that you're doing? Because I'm quite interested in history in myself. So if you could also kind of unravel the kind of importance of history and actually kind of the few things that you alluded to regarding also the name of Allah and how people shared that. I find that etymology quite interesting as well.
I think in times of conflict is sometimes we forget that there have been longer periods of time where we've been neighbors and worked together. And certain things in history one doesn't forget. Just a couple of days ago, I'd invited a group of Jewish colleagues to come for a retreat. And when we started to talk, and in particular share experiences from history, it was very powerful to go through and to see periods of time where we worked together. I was in Iraq actually two weeks ago or so. And I went to the shrine of the Prophet Ezekiel, which is a biblical prophet for both Jews, Christians, and Muslim. And I took pictures, and my Jewish colleagues were in tears because the Hebrew writing was still there. Some of the Iraqi Jews remembered their ancestors living so peacefully with the Muslim population. I think it's important, these things. Now, for example, if there was to be, and I know at least traditionally in London and places like Southall, there have always been a bit of tensions between the Punjabi Muslims and the Punjabi Sikhs. But all of a sudden that's got better because of the Kartarpur Langa, which was opened by Imran Khan. And just that act of kindness, I guess, that had never been before, all of a sudden you find that it changes the entire dynamics of Sikh-Muslim relations. In India, of course, they do support one another more so. But in the UK, I realized that there was a love which all of a sudden developed. And I think acts of kindness to remind one another is very important. The fact that, and again, I'm not a politician, but what Imran Khan did do, I guess, for that particular, put all politics to one side, but what he did do, I think, for the Sikh community was, I commend him for that, because he's allowed a faith to be able to go to the holy shrine. And I think this is important. I think any faith, if they're in an Islamic country, they should be open to others to come. If it's in a non-Islamic country, the same thing applies. So I think these acts of kindness do generate goodwill. And when we do read history, for example, there are periods when we have worked together, been together, helped each other, and more so the humble beginnings of these faiths as well. You find that when they begin, at the very beginning, their leaders are so kind of all encompassing almost. They appreciate each other, which we fail to appreciate today, if you notice. I find that people tend to become religious and they become quite fundamentalist in many ways. They become intolerant. But if you look at your leaders, I look at my leaders, you look at yours, and in fact, I wouldn't even like to say mine and yours. They're really our leaders. If you look at our leaders, they were so open. They had their arms open to people. They didn't differentiate. And I guess this is why I could walk into a gurdwara and have langar, and nobody would say otherwise, because that's a principle coming down. But had that principle not been there by a leader, maybe we'd have said, right, you can't come in because maybe. And the same applies within Islam. Today, if for example, if a Shia has a majlis and you want to come for the langar, there would be no Shia that would turn you away. And the reason being is that Imam Hussain, who we revere, had this very open idea of humanity. Mm. He saw all of humanity as one, and the most important thing was compassion. So you will see these overflows and overlappings, and I think this is why it's important to read history. I look at somebody like Imam Hussain. I've read about the Hussaini Brahmins as well.
Okay.
That the Hussaini Brahmins, though they are Brahman and they follow the Hindu tradition, but at the same time they also have reverence for Imam Hussain. And in India, you find this a lot. This reverence for Imam Hussain, that people from across faiths come to commemorate Imam Hussain, for example. I remember back in 2001, when I think it was 7 or 8 Sikhs came to the local Shia mosque on the 7th or 8th of Muharram, which is 2 days before the day of Ashura when Imam Hussain died. Mm. And the recital was in Punjabi that night. And you could see it resonating with those 6 or 7 Sikh members who were there. And I think they were all from SOAS, actually.
Oh, yeah.
And they were all in Tooting. There was a place called Tooting in South London, and they came. And I found that, and I just happened to be there that night, and I found that absolutely fascinating to see. And I asked the main person, in fact, his name was Louis as well, Louis Francisco, something like that.
Oh, it was, yeah. I've had him on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So exactly. So, and he was a practicing Sikh at the time, and I asked him at the time, and he said, "Look, our 5 symbols," and he did a PhD on this, I think. Mm. So he was looking at similarities between the Shi'i faith, Shi'i Islamic faith, and Sikhi, and so because of that, he brought all I could think was the students. And they were vibing to these recitals. They were responding to them. I thought to myself, this is fascinating. If we knew more about our faith, if we studied more about our histories, actually we'd have a more peaceful life. Much of this hate would be removed. So anyway, I guess we're looking at it from a very idealistic level. I'm sure people can say, well, what about all the pain and suffering as well? Yes, there are pain and suffering. There was immense pain and suffering during the partition that took place. There were people who died in that. There were families who died in that. There are these things that took place, undoubtedly. Even today, sometimes politics can be, or religious politics can be used in a negative way. Mm. And there will be people who say, well, what's happening today in India? They're both Sikh and Muslims who may complain today. You have other issues as well. But of course, that goes hand in hand. But if you go to the history of what the leaders taught, they didn't teach hate, and they didn't teach killing, and they didn't teach disrespecting each other, and those are the key things. Hmm. As Islam and other religions teach, the way you tackle negativity is through kindness. Because if you truly want somebody to become a better person, by shouting and being angry with them, it's not going to happen. But by showing them love, it changes. When you walk outside, you are representing Guru Nanak. And if you're swearing and you're arguing and you're saying ridiculous things, you're not representing your Guru rightly. And if I'm outside and I'm representing my Prophet, and if I'm saying things and beating people up or swearing or whatever it may be or doing stupid things, I'm not representing my faith properly. And if I say to myself, if Guru Nanak was here and somebody says something disrespectful, I can't see him beating that person up or swearing. What I can see is compassionately him trying to explain things. And I see the Prophet as well. So as an ambassador to Guru Nanak, you've got to behave like Guru Nanak. So therefore, you've got to think before you react. And I've got, for example, myself, I've got to think before I react. What's the best way of reacting? Well, I tell you what the best way is. Compassion and love is not something that, goes amiss. You give people compassion and love, and you see people change.
Wow. That's so powerful. It's amazing because it goes back to that chivalry and I like how you said ambassador, and because in many ways community and tradition and chivalry have been fading, and I'd love just to end on sort of because actually the Islamic world is so wide and there's many different people come from different backgrounds and ancestral faiths. How does the tradition, obviously you're representing your faith with your dress. Other people's might come from like Indonesia or Egypt. How does tradition also play into the outer manifestation of keeping this representing in the material world, not just in Islam but also in other faiths as well? How does that play a role?
It's interesting you say that, because Islam, what made the Islamic civilization were certain cultures. Each culture felt that their Islam was the Islam. Because culture is an outer manifestation. Islam is, you could say, as a belief, as a faith, it requires a culture to have an outer manifestation. You had the Malay culture, they have their form of Islam. You have the subcontinental culture, have their form of Islam. You have the Persian culture, the Arab culture, the West African culture, the East European culture, for example, which is you go to Bosnia today, majority of Bosnia is Muslim. Turkey, Macedonia, all of these East European, you'll find a sizable Muslim population there. So each one of them have their own culture. And I think it's not a bad thing. I think Islam appreciated culture. And you notice, and I'll give you an example, and even why is culture so important? I can tell you, if you find a Sikh Punjabi and a Muslim Punjabi, they get on better than, for example, for argument's sake, than somebody, a Muslim and a Sikh who speak, let's say, Gujarati. Because you may understand the culture, you understand the language, you understand the music, you understand the traditions. And it tends to bring people closer. And this is why you'll notice that even within Islam, the House of Islam, 7 cultures. But it does, if there's a Persian there, it happens to be a Shia, but if there's a Persian Zoroastrian, they get along much better than, let's say a Pakistani Persian. Why? Because culture does play a huge role. It does. And I've always said that the bridge between Islam and Judaism are those, you could say, the Middle Eastern Jews who get it to a T. I remember many years ago, I was at a Shabbat dinner, and and it was a very famous Iranian Jew, probably the most famous Iranian Jew in the UK. I won't mention any names. He was very famous. Madonna would come to his home and stay and everything else. So, that's the biggest giveaway I can give. And he was speaking in Persian, and it was like, Be Khuda, Be Imam Razawi. Imam Razawi is the 8th Imam of the Shias, and he's using it as if and you felt like culturally this person is completely using all the phrases, the slang, and everything else. So I think culture has an immense role. And I do find that one of the ways of bringing religions together or solving differences is through the culture. Let's say, for example, you're from Amritsar, you go to Lahore. and the Lahoris would love you, the way, and I'm sure it's vice versa as well. Um, and I only say this because I've seen it on YouTube and spoken to friends and stuff. But it's that cultural affinity to one place. Where are you from? Well, I'm from Lahore. You've got this, the Lahoris also, oh, I'm from Lahore. And if it doesn't matter what background you're Hindu, you're Sikh, you're from Lahore, that's it. It's game over. In the same way, Indians, from Lucknow. Doesn't matter what part of, whether you're Hindu or whether you're Sikh or whether you're. So it's like that. It's phenomenal. Or you are from Tehran, for example, or whatever it may be. So I think that cultural dynamic is important.
Mm.
And so coming back to your original question, the idea of how it gets along. No, I think everybody gets along. I think religion is so vast and diverse that to have different cultures is a good thing. I manifest in a particular style of dress.
Mm.
You'll find that, for example, Sunnis may wear a different type of dress. If you're from Indonesia, you may wear a black hat, so to speak.
Batak, yeah.
Exactly. If you're, for example, I don't know, from, let's say, in India, you're from Lucknow, you wear the kurta, pajama, and kind of like that, Nehru, the cap that they wear,
Mm.
right? And so forth. So I think everybody has their own culture. They have their own style, and I think it's a good thing. These are the flavors of God, I think. These are the flavors of religion. And I don't believe in uniformity either. It'd be so boring if everybody was the same. We should be able to recognize people in all of their cultures and flavors and colors and so forth.
Mm.
Bad thing. I think it's a good thing.
Amazing. I think it goes back to that sacred geometry and manifesting and how the different cultures are. And of course, we're living in Scotland and the indigenous Scottish culture, and there's so much to explore there that I'm also curious about. But at that point, it's such a wonderful place to wrap up, I think. I'm very grateful for you to sit down and share all about Islam. I'm sure we just scratched the very, very surface. Yeah, and I'm just very grateful for you to share this with the audience. So yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Cool.
Thank you. A good conversation.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for listening.